community transport sort of got involved in this project, it sort of goes back. We have to sort of envision back to this time when the supported home model was released, and it was all a bit jarring to everybody, this idea that payment in arrears based upon a fee-for-service model might have just come out of what was essentially, I think, a 15-page sort of information release from the government. So the CTO's position was to advocate fairly immediately that fee-for-service was going to be catastrophic for community transport, because that we mirror a funding model that looks like a fixed plus variable sort of approach. We're an industry that has an awful lot of very expensive fixed costs on ground, in community across the whole country. So the supported home, we sort of jumped up and down a lot, and we got involved in the Supported Home Alliance very early on, feeling very strongly that we needed to come together and try to find a single voice, a single point of advocacy to go forward to government, that this was potentially a deal breaker for community transport. And as we sort of got started, the advocacy was very exciting, and it was moving forward, and it was we were all sort of coalescing around the ANAC model of funding, and in theory it looked really good, but we wondered if it would really work. Like, could we really get behind this and really advocate for it without testing it? So anyway, we thought, okay, let's test it. And we sort of moved forward asking that question, could this really work for community transport? And so we worked with Kathy and her amazing team across the university, and we developed a project. We developed a scope that would essentially, initially, we were just looking for a proof of concept. We were just looking for like something that would say, yeah, this could kind of sort of work, you know, this would be okay. And then to build a dialogue around that we could take to the sector to start this conversation around what funding should look like for our sector. It's very hard to start that conversation when all you know is block funding and all you can imagine is fee-for-service funding. Trying to find what that what might be innovative and or different, or find something that might be a hybrid or something we could coalesce around, sort of took a bit more bravery, I think. And so that's what we were sort of trying to do for the sector. So the questions that we asked and that we were asking inside community transport in New South Wales is, would an ANAC style model provide sustainability and stability for our sector? How would it compare to block funding? Because as Kathy said, you know, most of the sector knows block funding is secure within that working framework. So we wanted to be able to have that discussion and talk about what it would look like, even though the model was set up to counteract a fee-for-service funding model. And then how would it work? Like, what does it look like on the ground? Because it's hard for us I'm not a provider, but it's hard for providers to envision it if it's not sort of functional. So Kathy talked about our process, and from my perspective, the process was just a complete privilege to be a part of, just to get our providers together in a room, all representative from across council, large, small, providers who had diversified, providers who hadn't diversified, different, you know, multi-service councils, single service, the whole works, 12 of them representative in a room, and to see them challenged and frustrated and having to work through this process and really respond to the questions that Kathy and her team were asking them, and then to see the product at the end of that was really great. But the most important part of the process that I sort of had to do on the outside of this, of the data and the scientific piece, was to really get that conversation going within the larger sector. because there's not much point in us going through this project and coming up with a really great outcome if we can't get sector-wide support, and if we can't bring the sector with us in this conversation. So we did a lot of communication. We did webinars, we attended lots of regional forums, we had newsletter articles. And let's be clear, at the beginning of this project, I had not a lot of idea about how to talk about an ANAC model or how to explain it either. So this has been a really big journey for me. And it's taken some courageous and brave conversations around that, where the rubber meets the road, around fee for service, what that might mean for certain providers, what that might mean in when you're talking about rurality or remoteness. And it's been a real growth point for me and our organisation. And I think it's been a real growth point for us with our members and the providers that we work with. And yeah, it's taken a lot of bravery. So in the end, what did we find? So yeah, I think Kathy would agree that we got further than a proof of concept. We got to what would essentially look like a version 1, and that it is a credible alternative to the supported home program. And we believe that that it is also a credible alternative for block funding as well. So what we found, and Kathy touched upon the statistics, and that's the 70-30 sort of average across New South Wales. Of course, was very comfortable, very great outcome. That's what providers sort of want to know. We have some data sort of variations in there. It was a minimal study. Quality of data was great. We would need to take that further, of course, and it would need to be more specific to the sector to get those statistics correct. But on average, that's where we sat, that's where we sit. And that's a really good starting point to have the conversation going forward. The ANAC model provides stability in funding for our sector because it recognises that it costs money to provide a service, to be available, to be in place, and to operate in locality. And that is the first time that I think that we've been able to show that this is the actual cost of actually being there when someone needs you before that first MAC referral comes through. It is an efficient pricing model. So what that means is that it gets you away from the indexation, or like this year, I think you've probably all heard the indexation is pretty average. And we're all, busily trying to work out this unit cost to how we're going to deliver the outputs, and it's a real stress. An efficient pricing model is what the government say they want, and this is an efficient pricing model, and it ties costs to price. So it's an actual real representation of what it costs to deliver the service, and by removing that link to I'm going to not explain this right, but removing that link to $1 and putting it as a standard unit of measure means that we will keep that link between the cost and price of service delivery. Kathy covered all of that, how it's structured. It is really complex to hear how all that works. But I can promise you that in the reporting does look a lot more simpler than what this is. I'm losing my words now. And I recommend to providers who are hearing this for the first time to get onto our website. I'll put it in the chat and take a look at the work that was produced. We've got a technical report that was written by Kathy and her team. Take a look at it. It's really clear in how it explains the outcomes of this model, and you can also see we sort of have kept a bit of a library of how we got from point A to point X here, and I think it takes 2 or 3 times of being exposed to this kind of discussion around this model before you can really start to process it and start to think about how it might look across the whole home and community care sector. So exposure is important. Keep being exposed, keep asking those questions, keep testing your ideas. So as Kathy said, why does it work? You know, significantly, it is really different. You have to take your block funding brain out and remove your fee for service brain and look at this completely differently. It's it's a new model. It's not like anything we've worked with before. There's still a lot of work to be done. There's a whole lot of business rules that would be developed that would answer the how this is implemented or how this works across each service type. For community transport, the really big takeaway from this model is this idea of a relative value unit and the RVU. For many, many years, and I mean, I'm new to the sector, but the overarching question that we have been struggling with for years is, what is a trip? It's not dissimilar to what you hear from Meals on Wheels in the what is a meal. Like we have, for rural providers, the trip is based upon a distance or is challenged by a distance. For metro providers, the trip is challenged by time. This process was able to pull all that apart and look at what is the trigger for cost and take that to a standard, look at what the standard of a trip is, assign an RVU, and then that standard is a multiplier across cost. And so what it ended up being for us was time. Time was the most appropriate unit of measurement, or the most appropriate piece that relates to cost, trigger for cost. And then the RVU is measured across time. So you saw that in Kathy's model, that it's a 15-minute trip and then it multiplies out across that. So that for us changes completely how we can start to discuss with government what the value of our service is and how that service should be costed. And that's a major innovation. So what happened next for us is the CTO has shared the work with the Support at Home Alliance, and they have taken this work and they are advocating based upon this as a version 1 concept. The chair of our board took the work to the department and had that conversation at the bureaucratic level. That was received very positively, and that was before the election. We continue our internal dialogue with members, providers, any community transport organisation or provider across the country. I'm happy to have the conversation. We want to be ready for whatever those next steps are, whatever that next discussion point is. We want to be able to answer those questions that government might bring back to the table around how this model would work. And we share our thoughts, ideas and passion about this direction anytime and every time we're asked. Here I am today. It's a game changer for CT, for a lot of reasons, but primarily because it finally answers and allocates a cost to trips. There's still a lot of work to do. Kathy covered that all off. Part of that is finding out what the government wants to, where the government wants to take this, and what that relationship between the now, sort of this holding pattern we're in, block funding and or moving forward to attain all those goals that the government were trying to achieve 2 months ago. Where does that work? What's the short term? What's the long term? We are really thankful that we've engaged in this work because we feel like we can answer the question about the now, but also advocate for what the future looks like. And I think that's all I have for you today. So thank you. Happy to be a part of the conversation.